Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the 10 Golden Rules of Internet Marketing for Law Firms podcast. Great guest today, Matt Darner from Collbox. He's going to teach us all about cash flow collections. We'll get to Matt in 2 seconds. Just want to thank you for being here. Quick thing, if you listen to our shows, if you like them, you can help us a little bit by subscribing on YouTube if you watch and listen on YouTube, or if you're on iTunes or Spotify, subscribe to the show. If you really like us, give us a 5-star rating. It helps a lot. It helps us get great guests because a lot of the superstar folks, their publicity people are going to look at how many people subscribe to our show and whatnot. So take a minute, do that favor for me. And without further ado, Matt Donner, welcome to the 10 Golden Rules podcast.
Awesome. It's great to be here, Jay. I really appreciate the chance to come on.
So I teased a little bit, you're going to teach us all about cash flow and collections, but tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up with this great startup and what you guys, you got a great success story. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a wild ride. I half jokingly say in any like classes I teach and events I go to where, we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, which is accounts receivable and debt collection and cash flow. It's like you can just see, at least we get some laughs out of it, right? I tell people I used to have more hair before the start of this journey, and that is true. But yeah, it's a wild ride. We got started, I guess, going on 10 years ago now. I'll give you kind of the abridged version, but you might think of me as kind of all things partnerships, kind of the face of the company, go out and do great stuff like this episode. I'm lucky to have a wonderful business partner and co-founder who's my best friend, who is also all things engineering. So we make a fun little duo on that. But we got started about 10 years ago, really actually deep in sort of the collection space. And what I mean by that is we were trying to help small businesses of really any shape and size before we found our passion and our niche in law firms, uh, send past due things to collections, right? We were like a marketplace for finding a good collection agency, which is an even weirder place than we've ended up now. But always in the accounts receivable space, always trying to help small to mid-sized businesses grow and get paid for their hard work. And just like any good business story, right? We kind of learned a lot throughout the ups and downs of running a business, and it was a few years ago now that we really focused in on serving law firms, helping them get paid for their work, and we found in some technology partners like Clio and Smoke Ball, just awesome partnership on the tech side too, and everything just kind of clicked about 2 years ago, actually, and everything just kind of lined up, and it was like, we should have been here all along. So it's one of those kind of stories, but you got to stick around long enough to just learn the lessons, right? I know a lot of your listeners as business owners running their firms have all been through that too, right? We're all on that same sort of uh, train sometimes, right? Like this is the chaos of being business owners.
And you skipped right ahead to the company, but where are you from? Where'd you go to school? Tell us a little bit about Matt.
Yeah, I like to say the next best thing to an army brat. And what I mean by that is my dad was in the army, but got out of the army and started working for the federal government. And so, but we kept up the moving just as if he was when he was in the military. So we just kind of traded uniforms, I think, a little bit. But yeah, I'm originally from the Midwest. I'm from Kansas City, but I've lived all over the place. I've lived in New England. I've lived in El Paso, Texas, parts of Florida at times. I'm now in Austin, Texas. But my background, kind of curiously, I'm more of like a nerdy creative type, but that found his way into sales and biz dev. I don't know how. I was like a very nervous, quiet kid in middle school, and then some switch flipped somewhere. I got into theater, started doing sales right out of university. I went to University of Texas in Dallas. Um, and then I just found my passion in solving problems. Like, I mean, I know that sounds kind of cheesy, like it really kind of does, but like I just love consulting, right? I love working with business owners and figuring out what's going on and how can we solve it. I've worked in kind of inventory tracking and asset tracking. I've done some engagement and social stuff as well, and bounced around a few industries. But I'm always most interested when I'm really working with people like in the driver's seat at a business. And I don't know. I think it was inevitable I had to end up starting a company because I just couldn't think I'm also wildly unemployable. Like I need to put my hands into every like
Yeah,
pocket and or not pocket, but like bucket and pot and like I got to figure out how marketing works. Let's go do this. I'm
yeah.
not a marketer. I know
I
you
know
are,
exactly how you feel. Yeah,
but I couldn't help myself and I made too many people mad. So I think I ended up on the entrepreneur's journey, um, you know, ultimately kind of inevitably.
that's great. So, what are the top problems you like to solve problems? What are the top problems Callbox solves for folks?
Yeah, the world we live in, we talked about it at the top, accounts receivable, cash flow. It really is the lifeblood of any business, right? And I've worked with thousands of businesses now in this journey, and I don't care what industry or profession you're in, if you're not running a business that's sustainable, and what that means is, right, we bring in more money than we spend, right? Like we all know this instinctively, but I think when we get caught up in the day-to-day of running our business, sometimes we lose sight of like we need to know our numbers, right? So finance, accounting, particularly cash flow. But Callbox's whole deal is that, we take over all the past due bill follow-up for law firms. So kind of that nitty-gritty, kind of the dirty work a lot of people don't really like doing. We can track our time. Hopefully we're doing that religiously and doing well with that. We can dig into tech on that. But a lot of firms really suffer from we do our work, we track our time, we get our bills out the door, and then it's just kind of fingers crossed. Well, they'll probably pay, right? And then there's not really a great or well-defined process on the accounts receivable side after that. And so that's where we come in, not only help design that and work that into your firm, but really execute it. Particularly, we've got a whole team of people who do the phone calls, like actually pick up the phone and check in on past due bills on behalf of firms. And that's just been it's been a game changer, not just for us, but for the firms we serve as well. Like, turns out nobody really likes making collections calls. Go figure, right? So, um, that's kind of where we live.
Yeah, and you do it exclusively for law firms?
We do now, yeah. So I'd say there's some historical clients that have been with us for a long time or excellent clients, but in terms of who we cater to, who we go after, it's been a few years now that we exclusively, like I like to say, we only spend our calories trying to better this service for law firms. Like that's all we do now. So.
Clarity is a good thing, right?
So the year we focused in and kind of made the call, like we just, it's not to say we're, a multi-billion dollar company, but we're a lot more successful than we used to be, and things are a lot more comfortable than they used to be. But we were really struggling in the years before we focused in. And our first, we can talk more about the tech at some point, but we integrate with the practice management systems to see, because that is the source of the truth of the billing, and we really need that data to do what we do at scale. So as much as we're like in the services space, doing the calls and things like that, there's a huge technology component where what makes us so much more efficient and cost effective in that. But one of the things we do is integrate with the practice management system. And the year we integrated with Clio, it was like mid-year. I think we launched it in June. We tripled our revenue that year.
Awesome.
And it was like, oh, like I'll use colorful language maybe another time, but it's kind of like, oh my goodness, like I really wish we'd like done that a few years further back, right? After all
Yeah.
the stress and the roller coaster, and it just blew me away. And since then we were like, well, that was the ultimate validation, right? And we felt it, we thought it through, we interviewed, we did a lot of research and talking to firms, but at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding, right? You launched it 6 months in, and really not even a full year, right? Within 6 months of that, like the back half of that year, we tripled our revenue, and it was insane. So that
Yeah,
was nice.
there's riches in the niches, right?
I-
Is the expression. And there's so many things that when we started focusing only on law firms, like we'd done digital marketing for 15 years for every industry. And then the last 5 years, we only do law firms. And like there's so many things that you don't realize that's going to come with that. Like, first of all, our team got really, really good at it because that's all they do. They're
That's
not
right.
trying to figure out affiliate marketing, or they're not trying to figure out Amazon stores. Like, they're only trying to get law firms more traffic and more cases. It's pretty simple, right? And
Absolutely.
for me, like, my life got easier. Like, I knew which conferences I needed to be at.
Right.
Where do
We were
I want
talking
to
about
speak?
that before
I
yeah,
used to try and
absolutely.
speak at every conference, and I knew which book to write next, and what who to interview on my podcast, and what monthly webinar we should do. So,
Absolutely.
if y'all haven't figured out your niche, whether if you're a law firm, you got to figure out a niche. You got to be really, really good at something, or maybe two things if you have another partner, like we were talking about earlier.
That's
But
right.
the more you can niche down, the better your life will be.
Oh,
So
no. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, tell me a little bit more about the company and how you all service people and who's a good fit for the company.
Yeah, so we kind of come by this in an interesting way, right? Every startup founder wants to be like kind of the sexy new startup. Like AI is exploding right now. We all know that. Like the legal profession is kind of along for the ride too, right? Like there's been a lot of interesting things that have happened in that space already. I'm excited about that. I actually think there's an interesting role to play for that in the future of what we're working on. No, they're not exclusively. I think the thing that I've observed, and just to circle back very briefly on the niching down, I just want to echo what you said too, is we were trying to boil the ocean, right? Like this is classic, can't say no to any dollar that was coming across our radar. Because when you're so early in the journey, you're like, oh, we need money, we got to sell something, we have to be a business, right? And so, I mean, and this is in no way to say disparage these businesses, they're incredible professions, but like we're talking, I was chasing after plumbers, HVAC companies, marketing agencies, right? Content creators, startups, and law firms, and
Yeah.
architects, and it was just like you said, I didn't know how to speak their language. And when we think now, it's kind of obvious in hindsight, but it's the pressure to just say yes to anything that's mildly interested in what you're doing is so great. Especially, we're a venture-backed startup, right? We've taken some investor money at times, and we've been very blessed to have friendly investors. That's not always the case. I've got some founders I know that are really, really under the gun, right, on these things, and they've been really supportive of our journey to figure it out. But yeah, we were chasing kind of our tails, and I always like to say we were a mile wide, but only an inch deep, right? We just couldn't speak to anyone with any sort of acknowledgement that we really understood what they were going through. Um, and then as buyers, like we like to know something's built for us, right? Like it just makes sense once you really unpack it. Um, but yeah, in terms of like how we come by it though, as exciting as technology is, we're always looking at efficiencies. But the real root of what we do is like the kind of DNA here is to not lose the human touch, right? It's really important to us. And I think the reluctance for a lot of firm owners to engage in a solution of any kind, but particularly when we're talking about money, right? Collecting of money or helping in the aid of cash flow is don't ruin my relationships with my clients. My clients are my everything, like the relationship, the relationship, the relationship. And so, though we had the options in front of us to do way more automation, there's now some interesting stuff to play with on AI. We could have offshored this whole thing and made a lot more money in terms of margins, but we hire people trained in accounts receivable in the US wherever possible. We have some reps in Mexico as well because we do some work with immigration firms
Great.
where they want some Spanish speakers as well, which is great. But by and large, trained in accounts receivable, have that on their resume. Great with people that soft touch. I jokingly say, Callbox is like collections with a lowercase c. Is kind of my little pun or my play on it because our clients need to know that they can trust us with their best customers. And so what we try to do is mimic, basically, to put it plainly, what a firm should be doing if they had unlimited time and resources and hours in the day with the staff that they have. Execute a well thought out accounts receivable workflow that is run by someone who understands accounts receivable and can kind of thread the needle between we need to sometimes put pressure on our clients to pay their bills and make sure that we're being healthy as a business while really deeply respecting the relationship, especially those firms who work with consumers individually, right? Like we work with all kinds of firms. I see family law, immigration, general type business practices, some real estate, a little bit on the, estate planning if we talk probate and things like that. By and large, I'd say people who bill hourly, and don't get paid up front. Um, or at least as a part of their practice, right? As a part of their business, have some element of hourly billing, certainly have accounts receivable, but that's not exclusive either. If you're flat fee, but you break it up into installments, right? You're still owed that money. Or if, credit card payment falls off, like we just need to have a safety net for our business to make sure that we're following up on these past due bills with the right balance, right? And so that's who we try to serve. Um, and
What's
so,
your
yeah.
what's your why? What gets you up in the morning and excites you?
I think because I've just, like I was saying a little bit earlier, I've always been so passionate about like getting my hands dirty on every part of the business. I'll never forget, like, this is a little bit of a goofy story maybe, but one of my earlier career, in my sales career, one of my first jobs, I was working for a higher education startup, so technology for universities and colleges. And, my job, it wasn't a huge company. It was kind of a somewhat advanced startup, but probably around 50, 60 people, good head count, but not hundreds or thousands. And I was exclusively on the sales side, but like I just needed more resources. I was like, "Oh, I want to build this presentation." I was going after like kind of a unique market, and I just started building my own like presentations and collateral and like literally visually. I'm kind of an artistic person. I get into like Photoshop and things. I just started building it, and marketing kept getting mad at me. They're like, "That's not approved. Like it's not. You're not following the brand standards. You're not doing this." I'm like, "You said it would be 4 months to get me that. I'm sending it today by email, like to this and just kind of kept making people upset. So one, I wanted to learn more about businesses, and I've had the good fortune too, in a lot of other roles I've had, to work directly with business owners. And so for me to just see the cool and amazing things that they've built and the great services they've offered to their clients, like law firms do incredible work for their clients, right? They really are making life-changing efforts like for the clients, and then comparing that or combining that with just being so interested in the inner workings of these businesses, I, I don't know, it just became really interesting to me when we got started that like I have to pull out the stats, but I think every single year, and this is broader than just law firms, but over $100 billion is written off as bad debt in the U.S. every single year, right? It's from the IRS. I think it's 125 the last time I looked at it. And it's probably gone up since then. You know, small to mid-sized businesses are the backbone of our economy, right? Of our entire existence in the US, and yet they're bleeding out constantly on cash flow. The number one reason for businesses to fail is cash flow, right? We run out of cash, or we kind of get over our skis on expenses, and it just blows up in their face, right? They don't
Hard to
have enough
learn,
money.
right?
Yeah. And so when you then couple that with what I've learned over the last 10 years is that I've just again talked to so many owners. When I ask them, like, what does your accounts receivable policy look like? What's your process? How do we do it? I mean, I'm simplifying it and somewhat kind of being playful here, but a lot of times it's, I get my bill out the door and I hope for the best. Like that is the status quo, right? Because some percentage, and it's a good percentage, will pay on time or thereabouts, right? But then it's one of something of like a 20, 30, 40% that do start to delay. We can talk about some really cool stats that Clio put out last year on this topic for firms that I think shed a great light on this problem for law firms and how long it's really taking them to get paid. Um, it jams up everything, right? And I think there's some other things we could talk about, but it's not like our expenses stop just because we stop getting paid, right? I think like, your rent, your mortgage, whatever it is, you're in your payroll. I'm talking about your biggest expense. If you have employees, they would riot if they if they didn't get their paycheck, right? You wouldn't have employees for very long. If you're like, let me just drag this out, can you give me net 90 terms on paying your paycheck? Like unacceptable, right? You can't run a business that way. And yet we let clients do that to us, right? And so I think there's just a sort of a backwards thinking that's rooted in a good place. Like I'm, I want to take care of my client. I care for them. I have a big heart. Attorneys are self-deprecating a lot of the time. Like, oh, we're thought of as the bad guys and all the jokes that go around. But in this profession, some of the biggest hearts I've run into of all, and I've worked with lots of business types, they really do see what their clients are going through, and they're really trying to help, not only do great work, but help them on that side too. But I think unfortunately at their expense, right? So often, and it hurts their business so much.
Awesome. So you've got a great list. It's
Oh
the
yeah.
top 10 list. And hey, look, a guy from 10 Golden Rules, got to love a top 10 list.
That's
But
right.
there's top 10 strategies for cash flow and collections. So why don't you give us like three or four of the best ideas?
Yeah, so I'm really in this point in my journey trying to do more content, more education. It's for me, it's of course we want to grow revenue and these sorts of things, but for me now, I really think it's super important to just share what I've seen on the road and just not just myself, but also the stories from the law firm owners that I've been working with, and just kind of like trying to, I did this recently. I was telling you, before we get started, just to try to consolidate my thinking a little bit, right, on what are the biggest pitfalls, and the inverse of that, or what are the best high leverage best practices, right, that I think firms could implement that would make a meaningful difference, right, in their cash flow and their, I think, translate that to your well-being, right, your sanity in running a business, right, because I'm right there with you on that, right, and how hard this is to do. But I don't, I touched on this a little bit. One thing I think is that there just is no policy on accounts receivable. So if you do have past due bill, if you do bill, right, and do not get paid up front, whatever, version of that is, where if you have accounts receivable, you're putting yourself at risk, right, for cash flow issues. Eh, so many industries have AR. I'm not saying AR is your enemy. Like, and having any AR is, it's almost a good sign, right? Because if you're on net terms, or you have other things, like that means you're doing business. You got money coming in through the pipeline. So don't be afraid of it. But defining and documenting your accounts receivable policy, and the simplest version of that to me is, what am I going to do when blank happens, right? If it goes past due, what am I going to do? But not just in the broadest sense, but at day one past due, what am I going to do? At day 10 past due, what am I going to do? Day 30, 45. That's how AR works, or needs to work. It's just a series of actions against a timeline. That's all it is, right? So don't like overthink it, don't stress about it, but you write it down. And then from every practice area is different, but you have to define, like, what are your leverage points and what are your escalation points, right? So which means leverage is kind of, when am I going to stop working? Am I going to withdraw from the case? If you're in immigration, we're not going to court, to represent you. If you're in family law, similar, right? Or I'm going to file a motion to withdraw, right? But you got to balance that against, like, are you able to withdraw? If so, for how long? There's so many pieces. Each practice area needs to just kind of list out, what is my leverage as a business? What are they trying to get from me? What service and, am I giving to my clients? And then lay that out against a timeline. So documenting it. This is some content we've started to give away. There are great AR workflows out there. You can grab guidelines and templates for this thing. But what I suggest people do is start there, and then you slowly modify it to your firm, right, to your practice area and your comforts. Like, it's your business, so you do need to make a decision on some of these things, and then make sure you layer out those leverage points. That's number one. I know there's a lot there, but I think that's huge. It's just knowing what you're going to do, so that when it happens, you don't have to have the thought or the discussion internally of, well, they're getting kind of long in the tooth, it's a little past due, and then you have a meeting to talk about it. Like, that's such waste, right, for your
Yeah,
time
I
and your,
love that. Simple, right? Write
yeah,
it down, have a policy. Because
and then follow
here's,
the
here's
policy.
another trick question we get all the time. Some people will be like, we want to pause.
Oh, yeah. Oh man, I've been
Yeah,
there too. Yeah. We're gonna take a
pause.
break.
Okay, what exactly does pause mean? Like, and you don't want to upset them and be like, hey,
Yeah.
we got
A
to
lot of
collect.
times it means they
We've
want to
got a 60
cancel, but
day, 30-day
yeah.
cancellation. And
Right. The why there is so critical and so variable, right? Like, maybe they're having a cash flow crunch, right? That happens a lot too. We kind of help, it's ironic when they were like, we want to pause if that ever happens with us, which is rare, thankfully, because we're bringing in money, right? So our ROI, I'm grateful, with this opportunity to be able to track our efforts back very clearly, to a clear ROI. But yeah, sometimes you're doing amazing work, and then you're like, take a pause. Like, what does that mean, right? And you really need to go back into your sales cap a little bit and kind of diagnose and peel back the onion, right? You got to figure out what's behind it. What's the pain we're really in, right? So absolutely. Um, let's see. I mean, yeah, I could throw out a couple other things. I mean, I think technology is sort of another big one. A lot, of course, overwhelmingly firms are getting onto practice management solutions, uh, great payment options too. This kind of goes hand in hand. I have these as separate items in the list, but leverage technology, right? Like, so much time is wasted, just by, like, hand effort, handwriting, an email, or scheduling reminders and then going and writing those email reminders. There's great technology for that. That's something that our world we do, but also like a Clio, a Smoke Ball. There are tons of great practice management solutions out there, especially depending on your practice area. Leverage that technology, and then plugged into that, make sure you're making it as easy as possible for your clients to pay you. I think there's two pieces to unfold from that too, which are, be very as clear as you possibly can And I'm looking at you like hourly billing firms that, kind of, family law, I see this happen a lot, but many others too. I don't know. The costs are so variable, right? It depends, right? As we get into it, as much as you can, setting clear ranges of cost, estimates of cost, go more conservative. And I don't mean, sorry, I mean to say don't go lower on the number, go higher, right? You want to kind of under promise and over deliver on that one, right? Rather than the reverse, but setting clear cost expectations. And then, how much are you going to pay? When are you going to pay me? And how are you going to pay me? What's available to you as a client? And now with things like, of course, LawPay has been around for a long time. Like, make it easy. Credit card, absolutely. Now we could talk about this is like the latest kind of revolution, I feel like, in the legal and the payment space is financing, right? Affirm and LawPay made a great partnership recently that I think is revolutionizing the ability to finance legal fees, right? And there are other vendors out there too, not to knock them, but this is kind of the big one, right? Like LawPay going in after a firm and went from like we can finance handbags to wait, we can finance legal fees too, actually. Like we can buy now, pay later, anything. And so I think that's a huge thing to make sure you're up on for your firm too. How are we taking payment? And then are we availing ourselves of some interesting financing opportunities that shift the risk away from us? Because that's the other thing is AR is essentially you being a bank, right? Like for this is a little bit counter to my interest. Like before, it's like we want you to have AR so you'll find callback. Like no, I want you to get paid for your work and have a successful business, right? And so yeah, you got to think about ways to de-risk it for yourself too.
All right. So give me one more from the top 10 tips.
Yeah. So let's see, man. What am I? I have to pick one. I got my list off to the side here. I'm pretty excited about this thing, but I think I guess for me, just knowing what I've seen and why we exist and how I got here is just make sure that, you define that policy, we're leveraging technology, kind of making that process easier, like we talked about. Just make sure that someone owns this process inside of your firm. And that needs to not be the attorney, by the way, right? Like your opportunity cost is way too high if you're the one doing this follow-up. In no other industry does it work this way, right? Think about the last time you went to the doctor, right? And I have my beefs with this a little bit too, but if I ask about the cost of something when I'm talking to my doctor, they have done the ultimate job of this, right? Not really my thing. I have no idea what it costs. Like, I'm not saying do that because I am frustrated by that to some degree, but that's the billing department's problem, right? And then the billing department, you go talk to them, they are trained for this, they are wired for it. It is a specific skill set. And so I see a huge trap for firms. Because we're all trying to do more with less. We are too. I get it. But like if you've got your office manager or your paralegal or your other attorneys or just anyone who didn't say no, it's kind of delegated to follow up on your collections, it's probably not working as well as it could be because they're not doing all of the things in that policy that really need to be done, namely the phone calls. Like that's the big thing. But hire the right person for the job, just like you would choose, a new partner or an office administrator. Accounts receivable is a very specific skill set. So it's not even necessarily to say go find Collbox, like go, but if you do it yourself, just make sure you've got the right person wired for it. And they do exist because that's who we hire. So like that's they exist and you don't need a tool like us necessarily, but you do have to find the right person. That's a huge trap that you can fall in.
All right. So I didn't prep you with these. And normally I prep people, but hopefully you listened to a couple of our shows. These are our one-liners, real quick.
Oh,
Give me some apps or techniques you use for personal productivity.
personal productivity. I like doing time boxing a lot. So I'm a little old school. I definitely use my calendar for that. There are amazing apps for this, but blocking your time. I I'm I would say I'm still bad at it, but I'm fighting really hard that I'm easily distractible when it's like, hey, new thing popped into my inbox. I have to block off time to work on my business just as much as I have to block time to work in my business. So time boxing, I think, is essential for any business owner.
Good one. Best business books.
Well, you've got one back there. So traction, I think, is a really good one. This is a little bit easy to pull from.
Yeah.
What is another one? Hacking growth is good. And then if you're into sales or you're afraid of sales, actually, because a lot of people that kind of shy away from that, this has been my career. Um, The challenger sale is a really interesting one that may not make as much of the rounds, but just learning how to sell and do it well without having to feel like the bad guy, right? I think that that's important for a lot of people. The challenger sale is a great one.
I love it. I just heard about that one, and I don't have it on my massive stack of books to read. These are
That's
books read, okay, but I've got an equally big stack of books to read.
right.
Blogs, podcasts, YouTubes. What do you subscribe to, and when it hits your feed, you immediately go to that one?
Interesting. So personally, as a business owner, there's someone that I really like following. I fell into the trap of TikTok to some degree, and initially I think that was like not a good thing for me. And then thankfully, the algorithm kind of worked itself out, and I get a lot of awesome like entrepreneurs talking on there. I really enjoy Alex Hormozy's stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with him. I'm sure you've
Yeah,
seen
of
his
course.
where love that. I think that guy's really inspiring. Just I'm trying to do more content, right? And I'm notoriously bad at this. And like, even though I love talking, that's not a problem. I guess I'm still somehow camera shy after all these years a little bit. So I'm pushing myself to do that. I like I love his content. And there's some other kind of spin-offs I think that are very similar to him that are very good as well.
Who's your NFL team?
Ooh, so I'm admittedly not the best fan in the world, and that my passion is just running my business. But I come from Kansas City, and I know it'll feel overplayed now, but got to go with the Chiefs, I think, on that one. And
Yeah, easy one there, right?
yeah, well, it was harder before, but it's easy
Last
now.
one's even easier. Where can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so certainly on LinkedIn if you want to connect directly. I love chatting with business owners. Despite being a sales guy, I'm not a high pressure guy at all. If you want to just talk shop about running a business, or if you just want advice on cash flow, LinkedIn, Matt Darner. If you did want to reach out or hear any more about our content, collbox.co, so collbox.co. My email is just matt@collbox.co, so you can drop me a note there. But yeah, I love talking to business owners, particularly law firm owners. So if I can be a resource to any of the listeners, that's on the house. So I just like talking shop. It's fun for me too.
Well, it's not often we can bring someone to you on the podcast who can help you, streamline cash flow and get some cash into your business. So, Matt, thanks for your time today. It was awesome.
It's my pleasure, Jay. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the 10 Golden Rules of Internet Marketing for Law Firms podcast. Please send questions and comments to podcast@10goldenrules.com. That is podcast@TENgoldenrules.com.